Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Rob Madden, who is a performance coach, physiotherapist, strength coach, a number of different things that he does. And I'm sure Rob won't mind me saying I've been trying to pin him down for a little while to do this. And so I'm particularly looking forward to hearing his story, talking about his experience, because I've really enjoyed watching what you're doing on social media, and it just you make the profession look very, very exciting.
Oh, thanks, Andy. Happy to finally catch up with you, mate.
Yeah, no, likewise. So you've got a very impressive setup there. So where are you speaking from today?
Yeah, I'm just in my home loft, buddy. So, yeah, put a little bit of time into getting this going as I'm writing a course, a performance coaching course for physios with a friend of mine. So we've made a little studio space so we can actually get all the content done.
Very nice. Well, yeah, well, it looks good. Looks good.
Cheers. Cheers.
And so, yeah, just going back to your career then, and like how you got started in this area. Whereabouts are you from originally?
So born and raised in London. I studied physio in Bristol at UE. And then, yeah, ended up doing the NSCA, CSCS a bit later down. So, yeah, I kind of came back to London post grad, stayed in London, but obviously a hell of a lot of traveling over the last decade. But yeah, kind of more based in London these days, which is quite nice because I've got a 4-year-old daughter. So yeah, it gets a bit harder to travel. So not happy to be in one place. Still in North London.
And I did see somewhere that it was between physio and music that you were looking at doing when you were starting out.
Oh, that's really cool that you saw that. I can't remember where that was written, but yeah, I love music. I guess when I was about 16, I was at the point where I was deciding between music technology as a real interest, and yeah, music is still a big part of my life, like huge hobby. I don't play so much anymore as much as I used to, play a bit guitar, but I love listening to music, hip hop, reggae, soul, jazz, everything. So yeah, music's everything to me. But I feel like if I'd gone down the music route, I don't know how easy it would have been to have had stability, which is one of the big reasons why I chose kind of something more scientific. I felt like it'd be easier to get a job essentially, and yeah, but yeah, music's a big part of my life.
Mm. And do you think like that's more like obviously on the creative side of things as well? Do things like that when you've got a passion outside of what your current discipline is, how helpful is that for that new profession that you're doing?
It's a good question. I think it's really important to have really hobbies that are very different to what you do. And I think our industry is quite intense, and a lot of us are very passionate and live, sleep, and eat this profession. And I think for me, the older I've got, I've found that my hobbies have become more and more important. That it gives me a real separation mentally from that intensity that sometimes I operate at. So I really enjoy golf. I really enjoy poker. Other than obviously spending time with my family, but personal hobbies would be that and music, and it just kind of gives me that separation, which I think probably in my early career I didn't have enough of. I was pushing too hard on the career and not really having much balance.
So when you say you're pushing on that career, what was your pathway and vision? What did you have in mind for what you were going to be doing?
I suppose like a lot of grad physios, I was pretty strong-minded to get into elite sport, and I was quite lucky to get into it pretty early, I guess. I was passionate to work in snowboarding and got a lot of great opportunities in that world. And then I was just working as much as possible, earning a living within the NHS and then private practice, but also working with different squads, different teams, not necessarily earning that much money in the early days, but just trying to get as much exposure as I could. I was doing courses at the weekends as you do, and reading, studying, and I mean, I didn't have a girlfriend and I didn't have a mortgage, so I was just kind of just really solo minded on trying to give myself the best chance in this industry. But maybe at times my health and my well-being suffered because I wasn't really doing anything else but work and study, you know.
Mm. And then to get back into going to Bristol then, so how academic were you growing up?
I would say like middle of the pack, really. I was naturally not that academic, but I suppose had a high level of common sense and was pretty good at problem solving. I went to a state school, but was a very, very good state school, so I was surrounded by pretty smart kids, and that was probably good because it pushed me to be the best I could be at school, and I was a fairly kind of like standard grades. Like I got some A's, I got a few B's. I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I needed to get to do physio, and then at uni it was similar really. I was most interested in the people skills and developing the knowledge and the practical elements of physio, because that's really where I saw our profession and why I loved it. The research and the literature and the dissertations I found extremely challenging, and perhaps one of the reasons why I haven't had a particularly heavy post-grad like academic career. I've had a much more like living live, like being in the mix, working in clinics, working in sports. But I haven't really, other than the strength and conditioning, I haven't really gone down the academic physio route where a lot of my colleagues have.
Yeah, and then it's interesting you mentioned that it was the people skills. Then was that because you thought you were better at, you enjoyed that more than the academic side, or just because you said you saw the profession going that way? Was it?
Yeah, I think I'd probably say I enjoyed it for sure, but also that's what came naturally to me to be able to, at the time it was like going into a ward and doing an assessment of a 75-year-old lady who's just had a hip done, and that was what I was good at from when I was a student. And the academic side, I really had to work very hard, and I didn't feel like when I got to university, I didn't really feel like I had the right support to even know how to write articles and studies and papers. So it was a real uphill learning curve for me. But yeah, I think even nowadays I'm a better learner through listening and doing than I am reading literature.
Yeah, no, I find it really interesting that a number of people that I've chatted to on here, they were very similar. They talk about not being particularly academic, like James Moore. Want to know who you know from
he's
CHHB,
yeah.
And he same with him really. He's like he was a similar mindset. Ian Beasley had on recently, Andrew McCauley, and all of them have said that the academic side didn't particularly excite them. They didn't do particularly well, but they've all gone on, some of them, to be extremely academic and even gone into research and so on. So.
That's interesting. I mean, James is like was a mentor for me, and is one of the best out there in the world. And yeah, I think he's got a pretty photographic memory as well, so that probably helped him. But definitely one of the smartest guys I know. So I wouldn't even put myself anywhere near to his camp. But it's interesting that they share that, and it's kind of hopefully motivating for the guys coming up that maybe struggle with the academic aspects.
Yeah, well, no, definitely resonates with me on that side as well. So once you'd done Bristol, and you mentioned that you went into NHS and some private clinics with a view to getting into sports, like what was the pathway to doing that?
So I suppose there's different parts of my career, but if I go right back to the start, I don't know how naive I was. I guess I was pretty naive, but I was also like pretty relentless. So I was an avid snowboarder, and as I was writing my finals, I was writing lots of articles to big snowboard brands. I thought, you know what, just give me a chance to work for your professional riders. You don't have to pay me, just get my flight. And I didn't get anywhere. I didn't get any responses. But I managed to get in to have a chat with the British team through a friend I had who had worked for the British ski team a little bit. So I ended up speaking to the Snowboard team. I knew they didn't have a budget, and I basically said, look, I know I'm just fresh out of university. I haven't got any experience, but I am, pretty willing to learn and willing to know where my boundaries are. And yeah, I took a job. I was lucky to get a job. I took my first interview at the Olympic Medical Institute, 2008. I was really nervous because it was like I felt really out of my comfort zone. I was like 22, 23 years old. And they gave me the job and essentially didn't pay me for a year. They just paid for my expenses, and I absolutely loved it. It was such an awesome experience. I was traveling all around the world with snowboarders and getting to do what I loved and getting great experience, having the support of Greg Retter, who was the head of the OMI at the time. And him mentoring me a little bit, and then able to go back to, I did a year and a half NHS, then I was in a private clinic after that. So I was able to kind of get that private exposure in London, and then travel for like 1 or 2 weeks a month in the winter. So it's kind of a good balance of building my clinical exposure at the same time as building my kind of sports experience with a lot of trauma, as you can imagine, when these guys are getting themselves hurt on a frequent basis.
Yeah, well, I'm actually talking about going skiing for the first time, so I might have to pick your brains on that one.
Nice. Yeah, we can get your legs ready for sure.
I definitely need that. Definitely need it. Yeah, and then so going back to like Greg Retter then, so what do you think someone like that saw, big name in sports medicine, what did he see in you as someone who's quite inexperienced then to give you a role?
Yeah, I'm always grateful to Greg for that. And I actually saw him a few years back. It was kind of cool to, like 10, 15 years on. But I as I said, I was clear in the interview that I knew what my limits were, diagnostically, treatment wise. I knew I'd done my sports massage diploma in my final year to allow myself more opportunity. So I kind of said, look, any complex assessing or any injury queries will always be managed, like overseen by him, and I'll report back to him. And that gave the head coach a level of trust to know that I wasn't going to make a mistake, and if there was anything challenging, I would defer it. And I was throwing myself a little bit in the deep end, but I wasn't blagging it. I was being honest with where I was at in terms of experience and trying to make the riders understand that. And that was a huge platform for me to open more doors within British sport, and then eventually Canadian, the Olympic Canadian stuff that I did. But I'm truly thankful, and the head coach is like one of my good friends now. So we worked together for like 8 years. So it was it's funny to think back at where it started.
So like you mentioned that snowboarding and that sort of area of sport, that's because you're interested in well, you did that yourself. You were just someone that was part of your hobbies.
Yeah, exactly. I loved it, and I still do. But I left the sport, excuse me, after about 8 years. And I was obviously doing other sports while I was working in it as well. But yeah, I guess naturally where that led me to is a lot of individual sport exposure, obviously boxing eventually, but I covered a little Bob Skeleton, I covered some judo, I covered some archery, some basketball, different sports, but a lot of them were individual based sports. So I started to get pretty good at building good relationships with them on an individual basis and understanding what they needed for performance and injury management. And certainly my career has been very biased towards individual athletes versus team sport.
And was that something that were you actively looking to do into individual, like when you were looking to get into sport and working in elite sport? Was that a particular focus?
No, I think good question. No, I didn't plan it, and it just happened that way. And obviously with Formula One, that couldn't be any more individual. Like at the same time, obviously the team is everything to the driver, but you're just operating on a really intense level with one person all year round. And I'm sure we'll come on to that. But in terms of that, actually, I probably wouldn't have minded getting into football. However, I remember quite early on in my career just doing the maths in my head over a lot of different jobs and thinking, well, if I work in football, I have to work weekends, and then I have to work Christmas, and I have to travel. And, ultimately, did I want a career where I feel like I'm working like all the time? And I kind of, for me, balance was always important. So I kind of moved away from like rugby and football for that reason.
Right, who do you support football wise?
Man United, actually. Yeah, my dad's from Manchester, so that's my excuse.
Yeah.
Cockney Red, I'm afraid.
I'm actually just been watching a interview with David Gill talking about the good old days for you guys. Yeah, and it is quite, with Rio Ferdinand, it's quite interesting thinking back. I'm an Everton fan, but I used to always love Man U destroying Liverpool in that period. So a bit of synergy from that element. So like in terms of those team sports, did you get much experience in working in team sports?
No, not a whole heap. I did a little bit in like lower league football, a little bit in basketball, and then I helped. first ever kind of sports team gig was actually at Saracen's Academy with Lily Devine. She was great. She taught me a lot back then. That was like straight out of uni, kind of understand how to strap and how it works in this big circus of elite sport. But no, I certainly don't have a whole heap of experience in that world. But I know, some of my colleagues now are kind of involved in or around the NBA, which is obviously quite an interesting sport as well. And I've done a tiny bit of consulting kind of towards NFL and neck training as well. So I find that whole US infrastructure really interesting, and I think it would be amazing to work in NBA or NFL or even Major League Hockey. But I think, again, it's hard to have that balance, that family balance. Like NBA particularly, you work so much. But saying that, a lot of people that I know went into the NBA, they didn't leave. They stayed there for 10 years or longer. So it must be pretty epic once you're in it.
Yeah. No, well, I met James there a couple of months ago, and like he went to a Brooklyn Nets match. And,
oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah. So no, yeah, he sorted us out big time. So no, it did sound really interesting. He's specializing with mainly one player. So it does sound like a really interesting dynamic, which, can be good financially, but also experience-wise, living in Manhattan, pretty epic.
Yeah, good. I'm happy for him. Yeah, he's really supported me a lot, and he deserves to have an epic job because he's got a super brain. And yeah, all the best to him, man. He's good for him.
And then, so in terms, like you mentioned, some of the skills there about building those relationships. But what do you think? I think it must be quite intense if you're with someone a lot. You're having to get on with them well, but also be driving them. Certainly in your role as a performance coach.
Yeah, I mean, you say driving as well. Like you can end up driving. You can end up, you're traveling with them. You're having dinners with them. It's great. I love it. I've had, I suppose, the two athletes I've worked closest with on an individual basis are Anthony Joshua and Lance Stroll, and they're like two of my really good friends, I would say, as well. Like I love them to bits, and they're, whether I'm working with them or not, I'll always want to see them do well in their careers and more so their own happiness and health, right? As when the media are critical of athletes, it can really be quite frustrating. But I think, yeah, you need to know when it's good to have space, and they might be out with friends, or you might get invited to a dinner where there's friends and family, and you might think, what, we've been in each other's pockets for 5 days. It's good to give step away and give each other a bit of space, because you're sometimes spending more time with them than you would your own like wife or partner. So balance and knowing when to push, when to pull, like depending on their moods, being a bit of a chameleon. Like they might be trying to swerve a training session, or they might be challenging you on something, and sometimes you can challenge them back, and you can push them, and you can really like encourage them to make the right decision. Sometimes you know what, I'm going to pick my battles, and today let's just let's leave it. So yeah, for me, like that was around 2012, 13. I was really interested and keen to pursue the F1 stuff, and it took me quite a few years to figure out how I was going to get into it. And the job I took with Lance in 2017 was like a dream job, really, because I was burnt out from seeing like 65 people a week. Literally, I was like hustling to earn a good salary, and I had this sort of mentality and philosophy of like, I want to give more to less people, and in this case it was mostly just him, and trying to have a broader understanding of sleep and nutrition, psychology, and working with other really amazing professions in those respective areas to be the middleman and reinforce messages and stuff. So I absolutely loved it. I learned so much and really broadened myself as a performance coach / physio. It wasn't really much about injury management or prevention. It was about overall health, well-being, and performance optimization.
So what was the chronology then of you getting into those big roles? Was AJ was before Lance Stroll?
Yeah, AJ, I took the job so James kindly gave me the job at CHHP around 2013, which is kind of crazy to think it's like over a decade ago. And then I was working quite closely with Mike Loosemore, AJ went pro, and I ended up working with him, and we built a really good relationship. And then 4 or 5 years later, post Klitschko, I started working with Lance. Excuse me. But it was actually part-time initially, and I was able to continue working with AJ. And obviously Gatman has been on the ground for a long time, and Cena. So there's like 2 or 3 of us that help him, whether he's in Sheffield, Dubai, London, we kind of have it covered. But yeah, it was a weird one. It was a really weird one. I was working with British Skeleton I think it was just before the London Olympics, 2011. And one of the athletes said to me, "What's your dream job? Like, what would you love to do?" And I said, "Look, I would love to work in Formula One and learn about other areas of performance, and, not just be a physio, but do some of those other interesting areas like conditioning and etc." And then I went down to the hotel lobby, and it was iZone back then, the EIS system to write your notes. So I went down to write my notes. I opened up my emails, and I did first email that came up, F1 physio. Bearing in mind that you literally never ever see a single job in F1, right? Everyone would know that, anyone who's interested or been in the industry like you for a long time. So I opened this email. "Dear Rob, got your email off Greg Retta. We're looking for someone short notice to do this job." It was really well paid at the time. I think it was like 400 quid a day, which was like exceptionally high for me back then. It was like, wow, that's a lot of money. And yeah, I went for it. I was actually abroad with the guys, so I couldn't interview. And then I think I essentially didn't have enough performance experience anyway, but it sort of lit a candle in my brain, so to speak. And I was like, right, that's what I want to do. How do I do it? How do I get good now at coaching? How do I understand what I need to do so I can get that job next time I get asked? So that's where I started studying the SNC and talking to people like Angela Cullen, who was looking after Lewis, and was Ollie Finley, who also had looked after Lewis, and just having conversations with guys that I knew were in the sport to try and understand how I could get into it. And then ultimately that led me to Hintzer Performance, who were who were fantastic and were the kind of big supporting arm to a lot of Formula One drivers. And yeah, that was where I got inside and got the job.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned about working with James at CHHP, and like that is like a real VIP section of clinicians that tend to work there. So again, like, what do you think? Like, who interviewed you for that, and like, how did that role come about?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to be there. Yeah, for sure. James interviewed me. I went up to Saracens, and someone had introduced me to us, and he was looking for kind of young physios, but not newly qualified. So I kind of ticked the box. I was like 5-6 years out. I had some pretty good private practice exposure and that early sports exposure. And yeah, he was willing to give me a chance. He sort of ripped me apart, to be honest. I think he asked me about hamstring ultrasound because I said, "Oh, I'm doing a bit of ultrasound scanning in North London with my boss, who was a sonographer," and he just like pulled my insides out over ultrasonography. I was like, "Oh God, why did I start this conversation?" But he did that over and over and over and made me feel like exceptionally uncomfortable multiple times. But I'm really thankful for it because he made me a much better clinician by challenging my weaknesses. And he was the only person that really did that. He just doesn't really care. Like if you say something wrong, he'll just like go to the jugular. And it's a certain style which, like, as I said, it gets you to a point where you then have to evolve the way you think, so that next time he asks you, you can be a level up from where you were. And I took on a heavy role of spinal management with Tom Deckers, and that was really great and at times challenging. But again, we're all developing each other. We had Jeremy Lewis there, who was amazing. It was good to learn from him, and lots of other solid physios that you could just pick their brains and grow.
Yeah, just as you mentioned, that reminded me. So I met James for a coffee, just very informal. I was in London, pop and have a coffee. So very nice. One of my colleagues just said, "Oh yeah, come and meet him." And he's like, "Oh great." And then James Moore. So James just was like, "So just tell me about wherever." And so he said this, and James just absolutely nailed him. It's just And I could tell he was doing, like, he was being genuine, but also he just absolutely, exactly what you said, just brutalized him. And then at the end of it, like, Dom was like, "What was that?" But he still cites it and says, "No, no, it's just
It's
really
good.
good." Like, it makes you think. I've had it in my time when I've done a presentation. I remember speaking to one.
Yeah.
It's an elite football team, and they were just like, "That was one of the worst presentations I've ever seen," to me. And I'm just like, "Oh God." But it's like, it's absolute cringeworthy at the time. However, it is character building, and you just think, I remember it. That was like 15 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And it actually, he is right, like all the time. And I remember I had an idea for like a course. I wanted to build like a spinal course for personal trainers, and the whole thought process was like I could make personal trainers better at dealing with back pain when they're in the gym. Seems like a really sensible thing to do, but again, I remember him saying, "Look, how are you going to do that? There's so many legal ramifications. They're not qualified. What are you going to teach them to do? You can't teach them to assess because they're not legally allowed to. So, you know, it's good you have these conversations. They last 2-3 minutes. You're like, okay, he's right. And I could have gone way down the line of actually writing a course and then ended up thinking, why did I do that? So, yeah, he is good at telling you as it is.
So when you get the opportunity to work with Anthony Joshua, then, so for one, like, what was that? I'm sure there was a longer process than just, right, do you want to do this? But like, what was it like when you got that role? Like, how did you feel? Bear in mind, you must have been relatively young then as well yourself.
Yeah, I would have been. So it was 2023. So no, 2023 last year, 2013. So yeah, I was like 25. So yeah, pretty young. But he was young as well. He's younger than me. So he was like 22, 23, just won the gold medal. But interesting, Joshua was like someone to give chances to young people. He didn't have a bigger budget. He'd just gone pro. So he didn't have a lot of money. Back then you maybe making like 10, 20 grand a fight, which wasn't a lot at all, bearing in mind he's got to pay his coach and pay for his housing or whatever. So obviously it's changed now, but yeah, for me, I just remember thinking, wow, this is a big honor. Don't F it up. Like, just do the best job you can and go the extra mile. Like, if he wanted a late session, if he wanted to change time, I just like always just let him do what he wanted. And I tried to never say no, and like built a really good relationship with him. And, as part of the team, as I said, Ian was great. Mike was great. We had Mark Ellison, nutrition, and lots of awesome performance staff that could provide that 360 service for him. And yeah, obviously building up to Klitschko, I was really like heavily involved with him. And then there were a few years where, yeah, he's gone to the US and I wasn't really involved, but yeah, happy to be working quite closely with him at the moment again and seeing him like firing on all cylinders. He's looking really great. So yeah, just actually literally just saw him before this. So yeah, have a great relationship with him, and I appreciate his trust in me, and yeah, try and keep delivering, as part of the team.
Yeah, no, it is incredible. I went to I think it was the Brazil fight was before the Klitschko one, wasn't it? In
Yeah,
Manchester, because I think
Manchester. Yeah,
Klitschko came in the ring. I went to that one, and
yes,
I went to Wembley as well, and it was just
yes.
like Wembley's the atmosphere. Like, it was just electric, wasn't it?
It was still like the craziest night of my life. That yeah, it was. I still remember the doors opening, and you could see all the people's phones, like it looked like stars, and obviously Biggie, the music dropping, and just like incredible. Yeah, the whole thing. The fight was insane, and none of us could sleep afterwards. You just so much adrenaline. That was a really special night. Yeah, I'm glad you went. It was epic.
Well, it was. I remember, like, you vividly remember things, but I think it was the fifth round when it all kind of like kicked off, and when he obviously put him down, and then but the atmosphere when you're thinking, hang on, what's going on here? Klitschko all of a sudden comes back. Like, what is it like for you
Yeah,
when you're so invested in an athlete,
yeah.
and it's like you've almost won, it looks like, and then all of a sudden it's like, what's it's going to be over?
Yeah, honestly, you can't. I say it was the best night. The actual fight is kind of torture. Like, it feels like a family member is in there. Like you obviously have such a good relationship with someone, you just want the best for them. And when he's down on the canvas, or where he's in the corner, you think, oh, like the feeling you get is this feeling of fear or anxiety. It's really somatic. It's really real. Like, you're sweating, you can feel your heart rate, you feel a bit sick. Like, I used to get quite nauseous before the fight. Like, I would never tell him that, but like, I'd feel like I wouldn't want to eat. So to be honest, I never really enjoyed it. And like the next one in Saudi, it'd probably be the same. Like, you're sat there and you just kind of want him just to win, be healthy, and then you can relax after. So, and it's then when you watch the fight back, like I remember watching the fight back in where we were staying in St. John's Wood. We had a house and we had the fight on the TV, and it was like, you can have a drink, you can relax and watch the fight and appreciate it in the aftermath. But in the moment, it's hard.
I get stressed, so like, God knows what you think. It's like, yeah, you're really invested in what they're doing. So like,
Yeah.
he comes across as a very thoughtful person, real like cognitive person, and really considered, not just like the brutal athlete as he looks in terms of his physique and so on. Like, what is he like as a person?
Yeah, he's really an incredible person. Like, he's very warm. His energy is so like full. Like, he'll fill a room with his energy, and I think at times that can be like really tiring for him, because if he's got to do back-to-back events and he's got a lot of social activities or media activities, that drains the battery, and he's come to learn that. But yeah, he's the same guy he always was to me. Like, people can say what they want about him, and people say a lot of stupid things in the media, but I think some of the post-fight interviews that he's had in recent times, where he's maybe done some questionable things or said some things people didn't love, you have to remember that these guys are in the ring getting hit in the face and the side of the head. So it wouldn't be weird to pick up a small concussion that would cause some sort of mild delirium, or changing personalities in the acute phase after a fight. So people need to bear that in mind. But yeah, he's just literally the same guy he always was, and still like really grounded, and like doesn't like anything too fancy when he's in camp. Keeps it simple, and like grits his teeth and trains hard. Yeah, like it's quite incredible. Like, I think after all the fame and money and success, to still be so rooted in who he is, and I think that's probably largely thanks to his friendship circle and particularly his family.
Yeah, no, he comes across like that, so it's nice to hear that's the genuine case. I love the Louis Theroux interview he did quite recently as well. I thought it really came across well, and I still really bore my friends whenever I see Gatman in the corner and he's doing the cuts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know him, and he's just like there. It's like whatever. But it's so cool. It really is. It's great to know you guys, and like, again, you all speak so highly of him, so that's great. So in terms of like Lance Stroll, then, so how did that relationship start?
Yeah, so I interviewed with Hintzer, and then was quite lucky on timing, because Lance moved to London, was looking for a physio and someone who could do the strength and conditioning. So yeah, 2017, just after Klitschko, actually, I started working with him, and like, amazing kid. At the time was he was 18, I think. And yeah, just great energy, like worked hard, was a real laugh to be around. And yeah, I just kind of got to the end of 7 years with him. But yeah, he's again, another, like, the media can be critical about people, but like he's always just been amazing to me, and like he's a great person. And yeah, I've got a lot of fond memories of traveling the world with him, and yeah, seeing him grow. And it's a tough sport. It's brutal. They're going in week out and pushing themselves to the limits. So I learned a lot.
And then, so how do the similarities and differences between boxing and F1 look like?
Yeah, that is actually a great question, because you do have a few things that line up and cross over. Certainly weight management. In the case of heavyweight boxing, obviously it's not so relevant, although you still need to stay in some sort of shape, right? And AJ knows there's a certain range where he feels better than being too heavy. But the best way to think of it is these guys need to be fighting weight week in, week out. So they really need to keep their head down nutritionally, training wise. And it's hard. Like for the heavier guys, the bigger guys, the taller guys, they have to stay below a threshold of 80 kilos combined weight with the kit. So that's about 76 kilos because the helmet and the clothing weighs around 4. So you can imagine if someone's natural weight is kind of more in the late 70s region, then they're kind of having to go through periods of being in catabolic stress and losing weight in the off season, and it's tough. Like boxers might fight 3 times a year and weight cut more aggressively for 3 occasions, but the drivers are having to do that and manage the jet lag, the stress, the training, everything else. So I have a lot of respect for them, and I think maybe some people underappreciate how tough and how hard these guys work.
Like you're thinking that the people you've worked with, it's like you really is at the absolute top end. It's like it's a different mindset and different setup in football where there's a lot of different people there. But what characteristics do you see between, particularly say those two, that do make them to be absolutely so successful as they have been?
Yeah, obsessiveness, perfectionism, but not like in its purest sense, like not to the point of OCD, because that can be detrimental, but like being obsessed to get the job done. And perfectionist traits, which I certainly have as well, but again, pure perfectionism can be really, I think can send you the other way. But still looking for that perfection every day, looking for that next thing, I didn't quite move right when I did that, I didn't quite take that corner right when I did that, or I didn't quite throw that punch correctly. Then they're looking for, all right, how do I make that better? So it's that constant striving and dedication to the task. They both have that, and not afraid to do hard work and grit their teeth when they need to. For sure, they're both like, those guys get like really, really stuck in to doing the work they need to do. They're not lazy. They're always committed to the job in hand. And yeah, I think you've really got no choice in those sports, because it's you, right? You're on your own. Yeah, you've got a big team supporting you, but you're the one turning up to step into the arena, whether it's a racetrack or a ring. There's no one else. Like you're there and all lights are on you. It's like you have to be so resilient to do that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think James was with Andy Murray for a while as well. And again, it's like real intensity for how you do it. Huge, so how do you support those people then? Like, again, you said you're similar to that, but the previous one I did of this was with someone that's a really senior business leader, and he really helps thousands of businesses. And that's a trait that a lot of, say, business owners have, that they're constantly driving. Even if you really progressed a long way, you're still looking for that one little bit that, say, the wheels are going to fall off at any point. So, like, what's your role in terms of that for the athletes that you're working with to support them in whatever way you see fit?
Yeah, so you're always looking for, is there anything else we can be doing differently around optimizing their health? That's kind of a big thing I took a responsibility of with both of them. Like, okay, where's sleep technology? Where's wearable technology? Where's supplementation? Who do I need to talk about that? Who do I need to talk about L-theanine or dosing of zinc? Or should we use creatine? Or should we be using the 8 mattress to regulate body temp? Should we be wearing daylight glasses or sunglasses? All these little biohacks that can play small or larger roles accordingly. So I think I was always looking for tips and suggestions to bring to them and say, look, this could be something we look at. And a lot of the time that would happen organically. Like Lance might say to me on a flight, hey, my sleep's been a bit off. Is there anything we can do to sort of bring it back in? And then I'd maybe go over some old ground and remind him of, oh yeah, well, let's look at your bedtime routine and your supplementation. But then, also I've been hearing about this. This could be something we could add. And then, he's sometimes got the fortune of speaking to people like Peter Attia, so you can get his really expert input. And yeah, it was it was always really good. And I had Henry Howe, the osteo, who's been working closely with Lance the last couple of years. So we would always like thrash ideas out together. And what's been cool with AJ is he, as I said, he's always looking for that next thing. So his own, I suppose, and that as a sort of natural outcome of getting older and more injured, he's like, I'm not more injured, but he's got older and he needs to look after his body even more than when he was 20. He really prioritizes his recovery and his sleep. So we're always kind of looking at what gadgets are out there or what things are going to give him that extra edge towards better recovery so he can push harder.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So does he push you on to be bringing him new things then?
He doesn't, but he'll ask me, he'll challenge me. He might say like, oh, what do you think about this? So we were talking about nutrition earlier. We ended up like talking about Gary Brecker, and I was like, oh no, he's a clown. Like, you need to follow this guy, this like Lane Norton, who actually is a PhD nutritionist. And so I'll bring him like evidence and science that debunks like these guys that are like getting a lot of media exposure just because Dana White, made him famous or whatever. So yeah, social media, right? You have to be able to like diffuse your way through it, and yeah, it's a jungle. Like you have to be like, sometimes appreciate that there's a reason why he's maybe looking at something, but if you don't believe in it, you have to be able to debunk it in a sort of calm, rational, scientific way. Particularly around exercise, like that's been something that he'll always be looking for options around how he exercises, how he lifts, how he moves. So yeah, as a team, we try to kind of always collate the evidence and come to him with the best method so that we keep it pure and we don't get sidetracked by like fads or whatever.
Yeah, no, it must be fascinating having these interactions and these relationships with that level. And then, so for you setting your own company now, like what is the plan for you? Like what do you see your vision being going forward?
Yeah, so I'm consulting out of central London, so I do a combination of either physio and S&C separately, or often combining the two aspects, which I think is important. So generally, yeah, I take on clients like who want long-term optimization of their physical health and their recovery. I don't really love like just seeing someone for 2 or 3 sessions, which I did a lot back in the day, but I'm looking for more like, my client management is typically like retaining clients and getting them better and better over a period of time. And then, yeah, as I said, setting up an online course, a performance coaching course for therapists with my very good friend, Doug Tannehill. So he's just had his second child. I'm hustling, I'm busy. So it's probably going to be about 4 years till we get it out. But the structure is there. We're excited to at some point bring that out. And yeah, just building with Joshua again, really. That's kind of me. So I'm trying to not take on too much internationally, base myself out of London, and yeah, that's me.
Very good. Yeah, make sure you run that course past James first so he can annihilate it.
God, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'll be able to tolerate it.
Yeah,
but it's probably a thing to check in with the boss for sure.
And so what would you say then is that you've had how would you define success? Yours is a very sort of high level, high exposure career. What would you say like the key non-clinical skills to be a success within this industry?
Drive and like great communication skills. And I think it's a fine line between being keen and pursuing and being like too in someone's face. So like I have a young trainer, strength coach who I help a little bit, and he's just the right amount of energy because he's like really, really pushing himself to the limits, and he'll reach out, he'll ask for advice, but he's not like in my face all the time. So I think like be genuine, and I've had like a lot of queries that are like sometimes not even like addressed to me. They're just like copy and pasted, or you get messages that are like, back when I was involved in F1, it was like, I really want to work in F1. Let me know if I can come to Spa and spend the weekend with you. And you're like, oh, like what made you think that would be possible? Like, I don't even know who you are. Like, maybe start with a hello, and and with respect and love to the next gen or the current gen. I think, unfortunately, the world we live in now is like, they want it now. They want it like straight away. And they see this, they see these guys on the internet that are doing these jobs, and they want it straight away. And I don't blame them, but, you know, have patience and have perseverance, and reverse engineer where you want to be, and think about the steps to get there. So if you desperately do want to be in Formula One because you like watching Drive to Survive, then figure out why. Firstly, why do you actually want to be in it? Like, aside from Netflix, like, what's the real reason you want to do it? And then figure that out, and then figure out how to get there. But it's yeah, I think it's not easy to get any of those jobs that are like a very small amount of people. So yeah, it's important to have like a plan and stick to it.
Yeah, no, great advice. That's good. And then last question. So in terms of the Ngannou fight, how's it all going?
Yeah, good. So he's just having a little bit of a deload. He's kind of like midway through the camp now, so a bit of rest this week. He's been pushing pretty hard. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see him with this team now, with Ben Davison and his guys. I feel like they've given him a huge amount of clarity strategically. I felt like he looked really solid in the last fight. And it's not that he didn't the fights prior to that, but it was just really good to see him flowing that smoothly and popping his jab, and like looking really fluid in all his movements and everything. So yeah, zero complacency, head down. Negreanu's like got a really tough chin and is no joke. He put Fury on his back. So Josh is like really focused, and yeah, it's gonna be a good night. I'm excited. I say excited. I'm nervous, but yeah, looking forward to it.
Bit of both is fine.
Yeah.
No, it is hard for boxers, isn't it? Because they get so little exposure, and so everything is over scrutinized. And it's just to go from being he's finished to all of a sudden, oh, he's back now and he's better than Fury. It's just like I can imagine you just be like, oh God, this is just having to deal with that. It is quite a unique sport.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like for all athletes in those types of sports, like I feel like when the hype is on you, you have to ignore it, and when you're being criticized, you have to ignore it. You have to just kind of really just not really listen to it, and it's like not getting carried away with praise or criticism. And you can imagine that the praise is the harder one, actually, because when people are saying you're the best, it's like, how do you not listen to that? But in a way, you just want to be like, I've got my family, I've got my friends, I've got my team. That is all that matters. I don't care about the press. But easier said than done. Like I'm sat here not with that issue, but yeah, that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, don't start scrolling on your Instagram messages. That's probably a good start.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. Look, Rob, really appreciate you sharing that, and certainly some of the details of the AJ build up. So very best of luck with that and with everything you're doing.
Thank you,
really
Andy.
good what you're putting back into the industry, and I appreciate you sharing that with me today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Andy.
No problem. Cheers, Rob. Thank you.
All the best.